The beginning of a journey. In the bustling city of Madurai, a young boy named Sundar lived with his family in a modest home. His father was an electrical engineer, and his mother was a stenographer. They didn't have much, but they had dreams. Sundar was a curious child, always asking questions, always eager to learn. He was fascinated by the world around him, especially by technology. Wikipedia, meanwhile, in the city of Kota, a girl named Anjali was growing up in a similar environment. Her father worked at a government polytechnic college. Anjali was intelligent, ambitious, and had a passion for science. She dreamed of making a difference in the world. The Times of India. The Times of India, Part 2, Good Returns. Both Sundar and Anjali worked hard in school, their efforts leading them to the prestigious Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur. Sundar pursued metallurgical engineering, while Anjali studied chemical engineering. They met during their college years, their paths crossing in classrooms and study groups. Bollywood Shadis +2, The Times of India, Live Financial Express. Initially, they were just friends, sharing notes and discussing assignments. But as time passed, their bond grew stronger. They found comfort in each other's company, their conversations extending beyond academics. They talked about their dreams, their fears, and their aspirations. Bollywood Shadis in their final year, Sundar realized his feelings for Anjali had deepened. He decided to express his emotions, choosing a quiet evening to confess. To his relief and joy, Anjali felt the same way. Their friendship blossomed into love, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Financial Express, Plutter, Bollywood Shadis, +3 Financial Express, Plutter. However, life had its challenges. After graduation, Sundar received an opportunity to study in the United States. It was a chance to pursue his dreams, but it meant leaving Anjali behind. They decided to maintain a long-distance relationship, promising to support each other despite the distance. Communication was difficult. They didn't have access to smartphones or the internet. Calls were expensive, and letters took time. There were periods when they couldn't talk for weeks, even months. Yet, their love endured. They held on to their memories, their shared dreams, and the hope of being together again. Sundar faced numerous challenges in the United States. He struggled with cultural differences, financial constraints, and academic pressures. But he remained focused, driven by the desire to succeed and make Anjali proud. He completed his studies and secured a job at a semiconductor company. Financial Express +1 Bollywood Shadis +1 back in India, Anjali was building her own career. She worked as a business analyst, applying her knowledge and skills to real-world problems. She missed Sundar dearly, but remained patient, believing in their love and the future they planned together. The Times of India. Financial Express. After years of separation, Anjali joined Sundar in the United States. Their reunion was emotional, filled with tears of joy and relief. They realized that despite the distance and challenges, their love had only grown stronger. With stable jobs and a shared vision, they decided to take the next step. Sundar approached Anjali's parents, seeking their blessing for marriage. They agreed, recognizing the deep bond between the two. Sundar and Anjali got married, embarking on a new journey together. Their life in the United States was filled with hard work, mutual support, and shared dreams. They faced challenges but overcame them together, their love serving as a foundation for their success. As Sundar's career progressed, he received offers from major tech companies. He contemplated leaving his current job for better opportunities. Anjali, understanding his potential and the importance of stability, advised him to stay. Her guidance proved invaluable. Sundar's dedication and talent didn't go unnoticed. He climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming the CEO of Google. Throughout his journey, Anjali remained his confidant, advisor, and biggest supporter. The Economic Times, their story is a testament to love, resilience, and the power of partnership. It's a reminder that behind every successful person, there's often someone providing unwavering support and belief. As they continue their journey together, Sundar and Anjali inspire countless others, proving that with love and determination, anything is possible. Through storms and silence, The sun had barely risen over the sleepy skyline of California when Sundar stood alone by the kitchen window, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The steam had vanished, but his thoughts boiled silently. It had been nearly a year since he had left India, a year since he had hugged his mother goodbye, a year since he had seen Anjali's smile in person. That smile, soft, reassuring, filled with quiet strength, was the one thing that still kept him going through the loneliness. He had arrived in the United States with nothing but 2 bags, a scholarship, and a dream. Back home in Chennai, his family had worked hard to give him the chance to study abroad. His father, a man of few words but deep convictions, had told him before he boarded the plane, "Make your life count, son." Sundar remembered those words. Every time he sat alone in his dorm, missing the smell of his mother's cooking, the sound of the rain on the tin roof, and most of all, Anjali. Their love had not been dramatic. It hadn't needed to be. It was the kind of bond formed over years of shared struggle and mutual respect. At Kharagpur, Sundar had watched her from across the library, the way she would bite her pencil when she was deep in thought, how her brow would furrow while solving a problem, the small smile she reserved only for him. When he left for the US, they promised to stay together no matter what. But reality wasn't kind to young lovers separated by oceans. Communication was a daily battle. Sundar would rush to the campus phone booth late at night, dialing endlessly, sometimes only to hear static or an unanswered tone. When they finally spoke, their conversations were hurried, sometimes strained. He tried not to let her hear the exhaustion in his voice, the fear that he wouldn't make it, the doubts that crept in when classes became too hard or when he skipped meals to afford rent. He never told her about the nights he slept hungry, curled under a thin blanket in a room with no heater during winter. And she never told him how she would cry after putting down the phone, worried he wasn't telling her everything. One evening, during one of their rare calls, she said something that stuck with him forever. "I believe in you, Sundar. Not because I love you. I believe in you because you believe in others. You listen. You care. And that is rare." Her voice cracked on the last word. He wanted to reach through the phone line and hold her, to tell her he missed her more than anything. But the line dropped. Static. Silence. They didn't speak again for 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks were some of the darkest Sundar had faced. Deadlines piled up. His professor criticized his thesis work, calling it uninspired. He was passed over for an internship opportunity he had worked months for, and worst of all, he began to question if he had chosen the right path. Everyone around him seemed smarter, more confident, more prepared for the world. He felt like an outsider. But in the middle of this despair, a letter arrived. The envelope was thin, slightly torn at the edges, with careful handwriting that he would recognize anywhere. It was from Anjali. Inside, only 1 page. She had written, "Even if the world forgets who you are, I won't. Even if you forget what you're capable of, I'll remind you. You are not alone, Sundar. Not now, not ever." He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his wallet, and carried it every day since. Slowly, he began to rebuild himself. He spent longer hours in the lab, not out of desperation, but with purpose. He found professors who believed in him, mentors who guided him, and through it all he wrote back to Anjali, pages and pages filled with hope, struggle, laughter, and plans for a future he was determined to build with her. Back in India, Anjali was climbing her own mountains. She worked in a demanding corporate role, navigating a world where women were often overlooked and underestimated. But she was relentless. Her brilliance shone through data sheets and boardroom meetings, even as relatives whispered doubts, asking why she was waiting around for a boy who had gone to America. She stood firm. She wore no engagement ring, but in her heart, she had already made a lifelong commitment. Years passed. Finally, the day came when Sundar could afford to bring Anjali to the US. When she stepped off the plane, he was waiting at the gate, wearing the same shirt she had last seen him in, wrinkled, a bit faded, but clean. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world fell silent. No words, just tears and smiles. They had survived the storm. Their reunion was quiet but powerful. No grand gestures. Just a simple dinner in their small apartment, the scent of home-cooked food filling the air, laughter echoing in the kitchen as they spilled curry on the floor and fought over who should clean up. They married in a small ceremony, attended by close friends and family. There were no golden arches or diamond rings, just two hearts that had waited, endured, and chosen each other again and again. But peace didn't last long. As Sundar settled into his new role at a tech company, the industry itself began to shift rapidly. Companies were competing fiercely, products failing overnight. Innovations demanded faster than ever. Sundar faced long hours, ruthless competition, and rising pressure to perform. He was often away from home. There were days when Anjali ate alone, staring at the empty chair across the table, wondering if their hard-earned togetherness was slipping away. One night, he returned home well past midnight. He found Anjali asleep on the couch, her laptop still open, spreadsheet glowing faintly. He sat beside her, quietly closed the screen, and held her hand. She stirred and looked at him, her eyes tired but soft. "You're losing yourself," she whispered. Those 3 words haunted him. He couldn't let his ambition erase the man she fell in love with. He remembered what she had told him years ago. She believed in him because he believed in others. And somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that. He had stopped listening. The next morning, he made a decision. He turned down a lucrative offer that would have taken him away from home for 2 years. It shocked his peers. It upset his boss. But when he told Anjali, she didn't say a word. She simply hugged him, and in that embrace he found peace again. Their lives slowly found a rhythm. Sundar grew not just in title, but in wisdom. He became known not for being the loudest voice in the room, but for being the one who truly listened. His ideas were thoughtful, his leadership compassionate, and as his reputation grew, so did the responsibilities. Then, one evening, while checking his inbox, he received an email that made him freeze. It was from a recruiter at Google. He stared at the screen in disbelief. He had read about the company, admired its innovations, dreamed of working there. And now here it was, an invitation to interview. He didn't sleep that night. He walked into the bedroom where Anjali was reading and sat at the edge of the bed. He handed her the laptop. She read the message, looked up and smiled. "You're ready." "But what if I'm not?" he asked. "What if I fail?" She placed her hand on his. "Sundar, we didn't come this far to doubt ourselves now." And just like that, the fear inside him began to melt. He replied to the email the next day, but little did he know. The opportunity at Google would test not only his intellect but everything he stood for. His patience, his values, and his relationship with the one person who had always believed in him. Because as Sundar stepped into the world of Silicon Valley giants, what awaited him wasn't just a job. It was a battle for his soul. And it was just beginning. The code of trust. The first time Sundar walked into Google's office, he felt like he had stepped into another world. Bright open spaces, clusters of developers speaking in shorthand codes, walls filled with whiteboards scribbled with half-solved puzzles, and laughter that echoed through glass meeting rooms. It didn't feel like a regular company. It felt like a playground for genius. And somewhere deep inside, Sundar wondered, did he really belong here? His first week was a blur. The onboarding sessions were fast-paced, the expectations sky-high. He was joining as a product manager, tasked with overseeing the toolbar team, a role that many saw as minor, almost insignificant. Others considered toolbar a dying product, but Sundar didn't see it that way. Where others saw limits, he saw possibilities. Still, the pressure was unlike anything he had faced before. Everyone around him spoke with sharp clarity, presented ideas with confidence, and worked with a speed he struggled to match. He would stay up late after meetings, replaying conversations in his head, wondering if he had missed something. He doubted himself constantly. He felt like an outsider, a quiet man from India trying to find his voice in a room full of loud brilliance. One evening, He came home later than usual. Anjali was waiting with dinner, her face lit up with a patient smile, but her eyes betrayed concern. "You didn't touch your lunch again," she said softly. Sundar sat down, exhaling deeply. "I feel invisible there." Anjali poured him water, sat across from him and listened. "They speak so fast. They think so fast. Sometimes I open my mouth and then shut it, because I know they've already moved on." Anjali reached across the table and held his hand. "You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. You've never needed to be. You're the one who waits, watches, and then speaks what matters." Her words calmed the storm inside him. She had always seen him better than he saw himself. In the weeks that followed, Sundar began to change his approach. He stopped trying to match the energy around him. Instead, he started asking questions that no one else thought to ask. He listened deeply, noticed gaps, and slowly began suggesting improvements. His quiet, thoughtful style began to attract attention. Engineers started coming to him for feedback. He wasn't the loudest, but people were listening. Then came the meeting that changed everything. A major crisis had hit Google's toolbar product. Microsoft had made changes to its browser, which affected how Google's toolbar would function. Some at Google panicked, others dismissed the toolbar altogether. But Sundar, calm and composed, stood up during the product review and laid out a simple idea. What if Google didn't depend on other browsers at all? What if they created their own? The room fell silent. Some chuckled, thinking it unrealistic. Others nodded slowly, considering the possibility. It was a turning point. His suggestion was noted by the senior leadership. They didn't move on it immediately, but it stayed in the air, like a spark waiting to ignite. But not everyone was happy with Sundar's rise. One of his colleagues, someone who had expected to lead the toolbar project, felt sidelined. In private meetings, he began subtly undermining Sundar's work, raising doubts about his leadership, questioning his ideas, and suggesting that Sundar's quietness was a lack of conviction. Word of this began to spread. Sundar noticed the shift. Invitations to meetings stopped. Emails went unanswered. Once, a presentation he had prepared for weeks was abruptly reassigned. He felt the walls closing in. He came home one night, defeated. "I don't understand," he told Anjali. "I work hard. I help others. But someone's working against me and I can't even prove it." Anjali, always his mirror, said gently, "You don't need to prove anything to people who want to see you fail. You only need to prove to yourself that you won't let them change who you are." Sundar stayed quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. Over the next month, instead of fighting back with anger or complaint, he doubled down on what he did best: solving problems, lifting others up, building bridges. Slowly, people started to see the truth. His leadership wasn't loud, but it was steady. He didn't chase credit, but results spoke for him. Eventually, the whispers stopped. But the toll it had taken on his relationship with Anjali was harder to repair. They had always shared everything: meals, dreams, fears. But in the past few months, Sundar had begun shutting down. He came home late, spoke little, and often fell asleep with his laptop still open. Anjali felt the distance growing. She understood his world, but she missed their world. The little moments that once held them together. One evening she confronted him. "I know your job matters, Sundar, but you matter to me too, and right now I feel like I've lost you." He looked up, stunned. He hadn't realized how far he had drifted. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to make you feel alone." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then don't just say it. Show me." That weekend, Sundar took her to a small cottage by the coast. No Wi-Fi, no work, just waves and silence. They talked for hours, walked along the shore, cooked meals together, and laughed for the first time in weeks. As they sat on the porch under the stars, Sundar took her hand and said, "Everything I'm building for us. But I forgot that the most important thing we built is us." Anjali smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. It was a healing moment, not dramatic, but honest. And just as things began to feel whole again, a new opportunity knocked. Google was forming, a team for a secret project, Something bold. Something big. They were calling it Chrome. The catch? Sundar would have to lead it from scratch. Build the team. Build the vision. Take risks. Face resistance. He discussed it with Anjali. What do you want? She asked. I want to do it. But it might mean losing everything if it fails. Anjali looked at him for a long moment, then fail with courage, not fear. And so he said yes. But little did he know, the Chrome project would push him into a storm unlike any before. Internal battles, technical failures, betrayals, and a secret meeting that could have destroyed everything. The fire within the office was quieter than usual. The night Sundar sat alone in front of the whiteboard, his hand paused mid-sentence, marker uncapped, the beginnings of an idea still flickering in his mind. It was nearly midnight. Most of the building had emptied hours ago, yet he stayed. He wasn't just building a product, he was trying to shape the future. The Chrome project had begun with hope, but it was quickly becoming a war of willpower. Some within Google believed in it, others thought it was madness. Building a browser from scratch? Going head-to-head with giants like Microsoft's Internet Explorer? It felt like picking a fight with history itself. But Sundar wasn't interested in glory. He was chasing a vision. Faster browsing, simpler interfaces, more security, better design. A tool that respected the user, not overwhelmed them. Something that made the web feel like magic again. And yet, every day brought a new setback. Bugs piled up, timelines slipped, funding came under threat. And worst of all, whispers returned. This time, from higher up. Some executives felt the project was stealing attention from Google's core focus. Others thought Sundar's leadership style was too quiet for such a bold mission. One afternoon in a heated meeting, a senior engineer stood up and challenged him in front of the entire team. This isn't going to work, Sundar. We're patching holes in a boat that's already sinking. Why are we wasting time on something no one's asking for? The room fell silent. Sundar didn't respond with anger. He closed his laptop, leaned forward, and spoke in a calm, firm tone. You're right. No one's asking for it. But that's because they don't know what's possible yet. We're not fixing a boat. We're building wings. No applause, just a long pause. And then, one by one, heads nodded. They got back to work. But Sundar's calm face hid the storm inside. That night, he came home exhausted. Anjali was already asleep on the couch, surrounded by reports from her own job. She had been working late too, her own career in full motion. They were living under the same roof, but their lives had become parallel lines, never intersecting. He gently woke her and helped her to bed. She murmured something in her sleep, something he didn't quite catch. Maybe it was his name, maybe it was a question. But it stayed with him. The next morning he stood in the kitchen making tea. She joined him, her hair still damp from the shower, her eyes curious. You're scared, she said. He looked at her, surprised. How do you know? Because you've stopped talking in your sleep, and when you stop dreaming out loud, you're holding something in. He nodded slowly. I feel like I'm carrying glass in my hands. One wrong move and everything shatters. She leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise from their cups. Then don't carry it alone. But he didn't know how to share the weight. Not all of it, not the part that kept him up at night, because there was something he hadn't told her. A meeting had been held behind closed doors. A senior executive had warned him that if Chrome didn't show significant progress in the next 6 months, the project would be shut down. And worse, he'd likely be reassigned, sidelined, forgotten. Sundar hadn't shared this with Anjali, not because he didn't trust her, but because he was afraid of what it meant. For them, for the life they were building. He buried himself in the project. The team worked like a machine, coding, testing, breaking, rebuilding. Some days it felt like they were sprinting on a treadmill, fast but going nowhere. Then came the sabotage. An internal report was leaked, one that misrepresented their progress, painted Chrome as a failure in making, and reached some of Google's most influential leaders. Sundar knew it had come from someone on the inside. He didn't name names, didn't point fingers. Instead, he called an emergency meeting with his team. He stood before them, not as a boss, but as a believer. "Someone in this room may not believe in this project," he said, his voice steady. "And that's okay. But don't take away the belief of others. We can disagree, we can argue, but we do not break trust." No one spoke, but something shifted. The room, once divided, began to pull closer together. They doubled their efforts, and slowly, the cracks began to heal. Months passed. A prototype of Chrome finally came together. It was fast, light, clean, but it wasn't perfect, and, just as they prepared to test it, Sundar received a message that stopped him cold. Anjali's father had suffered a heart attack in India. Without hesitation, they booked the next flight. On the plane, Sundar held her hand tightly. She leaned against, his shoulder silent, worried. They stayed in India for 3 weeks. During that time, Sundar barely opened his laptop. He cooked for the family, ran errands, stayed up with Anjali through the long, quiet nights. One evening, as they sat under the stars on the terrace, Anjali turned to him and said, "I forgot what this felt like." "What?" "Us. Being together, without deadlines. Without meetings." He looked at her, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I never meant to drift away," he said. "You didn't drift," she replied. "You were pulled. By ambition. By duty. But now you have to decide. What pulls you more?" He didn't answer then. But when they returned to California, Sundar changed. He still worked hard, still pushed his team, but he started coming home earlier. He made dinner some nights. He even bought a small bonsai tree for the living room. Something to care for together. And finally the day arrived. Chrome was ready. They launched it quietly, almost humbly, no massive campaign, no giant announcement. But within weeks the world noticed. Tech blogs exploded with praise. Users loved the speed. Developers admired the simplicity. Google executives, once skeptical, now called it revolutionary. Chrome didn't just work. It changed the way people experienced the internet. And with its success, Sundar's name rose. He was offered a promotion, senior vice president. He came home that evening, placed the offer letter on the table, and looked at Anjali. "Before I say yes," he said, "I want to ask you something." "What?" "Do you still believe in the man I was when I had nothing?" She looked at him, then smiled. "Yes. And even more in the man who never forgot who he was, even when he had everything." They embraced. But as Sundar stepped into his new role, he had no idea that another challenge was already brewing, one that would test not only his leadership but his values. A challenge not of code, but of conscience. Because what came next was a war between silence and truth. The choice behind the curtain, the sound of distant thunder rolled across the bay as Sundar sat alone in his office, the city lights of Mountain View flickering like quiet stars outside the tall window. It was nearly midnight. Another long day behind him, yet rest felt farther away than ever. A document lay open on his screen, a confidential proposal, cold in tone, clinical in its language, yet carrying the weight of something far greater than data or design. It was the kind of document that didn't just define business strategy, it defined a man. The proposal outlined a plan for Google to re-enter the Chinese market. It was a long-anticipated move, an opportunity to bring services back to over 1 billion people. But there was a cost. In order to comply with the government's regulations, Google would have to censor search results, filter out information, silence voices. The technical side was simple. The ethical side, unbearable. Sundar stared at the screen as the storm outside cracked through the night sky. In that moment, the brightness of his success, the praise, the title, the admiration, dimmed beneath the weight of the question echoing inside him. What do we become when we trade truth for growth? He shut the laptop. His mind drifted back to a dusty classroom in Kharagpur, where years ago, he and Anjali had argued passionately over a debate topic, freedom of expression. She had stood up, bold and fierce, defending the right to speak, even when the words were uncomfortable. He had taken a more cautious stance, believing that some order was necessary. They never agreed. But even then, he had admired her conviction. Now, he was faced with that very dilemma. Only this time it wasn't theoretical, and the world was watching even if it didn't yet know. He returned home later than usual that night. The house was quiet, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of rain. Anjali was in the study reading. When she saw him, she closed her book, sensing something heavy in his silence. He walked in, sat beside her, and told her everything. He spoke slowly, carefully, like someone picking their way through broken glass. He told her about the meetings, the debates, the pressure from investors. He told her about the technical feasibility, the projected market growth, the opportunity. And then, he told her about the silence that would be forced upon millions. Anjali listened without interrupting. When he finished, she took his hand. "You already know the answer," she said. He looked away. "Do I?" "Yes. Because the sundar I fell in love with couldn't stay silent when something was wrong. Not then. Not now." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "If I push back, if I say no, I might lose everything. They'll find someone else who will say yes." She didn't flinch. "Then lose it." He opened his eyes. "If we're building a future," she continued, "let it be one we can look our children in the eye and say, we didn't build it on silence." Her words struck deep. And so the next day, Sundar walked into a closed-door meeting with the executive board. The air was thick with tension. The proposal was ready for approval. Everyone waited for him to speak. And he did. He didn't speak. As a CEO in waiting, he didn't speak as a strategist. He spoke as a human being. He laid out the risks, not financial, but moral. He warned against the erosion of trust. He spoke of the silent damage caused when convenience was chosen over conscience. Some nodded, some frowned, but no one interrupted. When he finished, there was no applause, just silence. And then slowly, the conversation shifted. The plan was not approved. Not then. Not in that form. It was a quiet victory, one that would never make headlines, one that some would call naive. But to Sundar it mattered more than any launch or promotion. That night, as he returned home, Anjali was waiting. He said nothing, just placed his head against her shoulder, and she understood. But the price of integrity was not just corporate discomfort. It came with consequences. Some within Google began to question Sundar's direction. He faced new pressure, subtle exclusions, more scrutiny, but he didn't waver. And yet, just as they began to rebuild their rhythm, life twisted again. Anjali came home one evening, her hands trembling slightly. Sundar noticed. "What's wrong?" She sat down slowly. "I've been offered a position back in India," she said. "Head of strategic growth at a leading firm. It's everything I've worked for, everything I've wanted." He blinked, caught off guard. "That's incredible," but something in her voice was off. "There's more," she said. "They need me to relocate, alone, for at least a year." A pause. "We'd have to live apart again." He looked at her, stunned. They had just found their way back to each other, just begun to feel whole again. "What do you want?" he asked. She looked down, then back at him. "I want to go, and I want you to tell me to go. Not because it's easy, but because you know who I am." He reached out, took her hands in his. "I fell in love with a woman who was never meant to stand behind someone. You were always meant to stand beside me. And sometimes, ahead." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then let me go," she whispered. He nodded slowly, the pain obvious but accepted. They spent their last weekend together in silence, laughter, and memories, a walk through the redwoods, a meal by candlelight, long conversations under thick blankets, their hands never letting go. And when she left for the airport, Sundar didn't cry. Not until he returned home and found the note she left him. On it, just 5 words: keep building what matters most. In the weeks that followed, Sundar buried himself in work, but not as a distraction. This time, with intention. He led, with empathy. He mentored younger employees. He pushed for ethical design. And slowly, the company began to change around him. Not just because of his ideas, but because of his example. He didn't just lead Google into new technologies. He led it toward a new way of thinking. A few months later, the call came, a call that would change everything. He was being offered the role of CEO of all of Google. And while the world celebrated the headline, Sundar sat quietly by the window that night, watching the sun disappear behind the city skyline, holding Anjali's note in his hand. He had achieved what many dream of. But at what cost? And just as he prepared to step into the most powerful position of his life, a phone call arrived from India. Anjali had collapsed and she wasn't waking up. The price of everything, the value of one. The phone rang at 3:47 a.m. Sundar jolted upright, breath caught in his chest, that strange premonition already curling in his stomach before he even answered. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. And that's what made it worse. It was her colleague from India. There had been an incident at Anjali's office. She had collapsed during a late-night meeting. Her heart had stopped, they said. Doctors revived her, but she hadn't woken up. Sundar's hand trembled as he thanked them, voice cracked and barely audible. He stood in the quiet kitchen, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the call ended. His world, so carefully built, so meticulously constructed over years of struggle and choices, had cracked at the foundation. Within hours, he was on a flight. 10 hours into the journey, cruising high above the clouds, Sundar sat motionless, staring at the seatback in front of him. The sky outside glowed with an eerie pale orange as the sun began to rise on the horizon. He thought of all the times he had watched the sunrise with Anjali, over student rooftops in Kharagpur, over cliffs in California, even over spreadsheets and steaming mugs of chai. He never thought he'd watch one like this, without her by his side. When he arrived at the hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. White walls, tired nurses, machines that beeped in monotonous rhythm. She was in the IQ, pale, still, tubes and wires, a machine breathing for her. For a long time he couldn't move, couldn't speak. He just sat at her bedside holding her hand. It was warm, but empty. He whispered stories to her, reminders, their inside jokes, the memory of that terrible dinner he tried to cook when they first moved in together, her laugh that followed him like music, the time they danced in the kitchen with socks on and fell on the floor laughing. He told her everything, not because he thought she could hear, but because he needed to say them. He needed her to remember the life they built. Days passed. She remained unconscious. Doctors were uncertain. There's a chance, they said, but time is slipping. During those days, calls from California poured in. Reporters waited outside the hospital. Executives sent messages. The official offer had been made. Sundar Pichai was now the CEO of Google. The timing felt cruel. The world was celebrating. He was breaking. He didn't respond to the messages. Not right away. Instead, he sat by her bedside, reading books to her, singing softly. Once he played a voice recording she had left him months earlier, the one where she reminded him to take care of the bonsai plant. That's when the nurse walked in and said gently, "She moved." His heart skipped, a blink, a twitch of her finger. The next day she opened her eyes, just for a second, then again, then longer. Her voice returned slowly, fragile, broken, but hers. And the first full sentence she spoke was, "You look tired." He laughed, wept, held her like glass. He stayed by her side for the next 2 weeks, helping her through the rehabilitation, feeding her soup, brushing her hair, whispering promises in the silence of early morning. Promises that from this moment on, nothing would be more important than her. Not titles, not launches, not anything. One afternoon, as she sat by the hospital window with the warm sun on her face, she looked at him and said, "You have to go back." He shook his head. "They need you." "I need you," he said. "Then lead. But lead with a heart that remembers what nearly slipped away." Those words carved themselves into his bones. When he returned to California weeks later, the media welcomed him with headlines: humble visionary, quiet genius, new face of Silicon Valley. But Sundar no longer saw himself in those titles. He had stood on the edge of everything he had worked for, and almost lost the one thing that mattered most. And so he led differently. He began restructuring internal policies around employee well-being. He implemented programs for mental health. He personally funded education scholarships in Anjali's name, targeting students from small towns in India, students who, like them, had potential but lacked opportunity. Every Friday evening he turned off his phone and walked through the garden with Anjali, who had recovered slowly but fully. They watched their bonsai tree grow, inch by inch. A tiny tree that had survived storms and neglect and still stood tall. Years passed. The world changed around them. But their love remained. Not flashy, not always easy, but real. Once in a rare interview, Sundar was asked what the greatest innovation of his life was. He paused, looked into the camera, and said, "Her. The life we made. The things we chose not to give up. That's the only legacy that matters." The interviewer asked if he regretted anything. He smiled gently. "Just one thing," he said, "that I didn't spend even more time holding her hand when I had the chance." And then he leaned forward and added something, barely, above a whisper. "You can rebuild companies, rebuild careers, but you don't get to rebuild time." And that was the truth he carried, beneath the boardrooms, beneath the awards, beneath the code. That love, silent but constant, is what built everything, and always will. The end. Thank you for staying through this entire story. You've just heard the untold love story of Sundar Pichai and Anjali. Not just a story of ambition, but of heart, of loss, of decisions that shape more than careers. They shape lives. If this moved you, if you found something in their journey that echoes inside you, share it. Not for views, but for others who might need to hear that real love endures, that humility leads, and that in the quietest moments, we find the loudest truths. Stay kind, stay grounded, and never forget what you're building when no one's watching.